Two teachers accused of a shocking crime. Both arrested and accused of sexual abuse of a student. What we know about the suspects in this case, especially for one that appears to have taken a shocking turn in life, from valedictorian to being accused of sexual misconduct in the classroom. We're on the case presented by Law and Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. Before we get started on this story, I am excited to announce the launch of our new YouTube channel here at Law and Crime. It's called Scandal. It's a channel dedicated to exposing the dark side of fame. And if you can guess by the name, we'll be covering all of the wild and disturbing crimes that happen behind closed doors in Hollywood. If that sounds like it's up your alley, click the link in the description now and subscribe to our new channel today to stay up to date on all the latest scandals and watch a few of our latest episodes. All right, let's get to this story. And it begins with a quote from the alleged victim in this case. And that quote is, "My school did not protect me as a child." The attorney for the alleged victim in this story provided that statement to the NBC affiliate in Atlanta. This is where the Georgia Bureau of Investigation says the alleged abuse took place. Nathaniel Greene Academy in Greene County, Georgia. It's a rural county, a little more than an hour away from Atlanta. It's a small private Christian school with just 85 students for grades kindergarten through high school. Here's a picture of 2017's graduating class, and we'll have much more about one of the people in this picture in just a moment. We are still working to get more details about the alleged abuse that the GBI says it uncovered, but here's what we know so far. GBI says an investigation started on June 14th of 2024. Investigators were asked to look into allegations of sexual contact between a teacher at NGA and a student. That investigation found that Bonnie Brown allegedly had sexual contact with a student while employed at the school. She's no longer a teacher there. Now you're looking at her booking photo, but let's take a step back because these are pictures from her Facebook page. Brown was once a student at this school and a really good one. She graduated as valedictorian in 2017 and in 2016 was homecoming queen. Let's go back to that class photo that I just talked about with the graduates from 2017. There is Brown with a medal around her neck. She was booked into the county jail. She's charged with improper sexual contact by an employee, agent, or foster parent. GBI investigators announced Brown's arrest on March 21st, but they weren't done. Days later, they announced a second arrest, another teacher, Sherri Malden. GBI says the 60-year-old allegedly engaged in sexual contact with a student when she was a teacher at the school. She was also booked into the county jail and charged with not just improper sexual contact by an employee, agent, or foster parent like Brown, but is also facing a charge of aggravated child molestation and a charge of statutory rape. Neither Malden or Brown are teachers at Nathaniel Greene Academy anymore. The school posted this message to parents on its Facebook page on the day that GBI announced Malden's arrest. It reads, quote, "Nathaniel Greene Academy's administration and board of trustees are aware of the arrests of 2 former employees and the allegations leading to those arrests. NGA's administration and board of trustees are cooperating with law enforcement and assisting them in every possible way. While being careful not to interfere with law enforcement's investigation, NGA's administration and board of trustees are conducting their own investigation to determine any and all appropriate measures which need to be taken by the school. As part of the investigation, the Board of Trustees is holding a closed session meeting on an emergency basis." It goes on to say that the school's board and administration will provide more information when they're able to while protecting the privacy of those involved. The message ends with, quote, "Nathaniel Greene Academy is committed to the safety, welfare, and education of all of its students, past, present, and future." At the time of this recording, it appears Nathaniel Greene Academy's Facebook page has been deactivated. It's unclear where Malden was working at the time of her arrest, but we know that Brown was still teaching up until her arrest on March 21st. Brown was teaching at Washington Wilkes County Primary School. It's a public K-12 school in a county next to the one where she's accused of having inappropriate contact with a student. That district released a statement saying, in part, the safety and well-being of students students in the Wilkes County School District is our highest priority. And school officials were not aware of the arrest until after the individual was taken into custody, nor were we informed of the criminal charges until the investigation was made public by the Georgia Bureau of Investigation on Friday. The individual is no longer a teacher at WWPS. It also makes sure to note that the circumstances leading to charges and Brown's arrest allegedly happened prior to her employment at the school. As the places where Brown and Malden work are trying to do damage control and distance themselves from this story by releasing those public statements, the most powerful statements in this case come from the alleged victim in this story. The attorney for that alleged victim spoke with WXIA TV in Atlanta. She alleges physical contact happened both inside and outside of school. She also released this statement on behalf of the alleged victim. It says, quote, "I am relieved that these two women have been arrested and the crimes are being fully investigated. These women took advantage of their positions as my teachers. My school did not protect me as a child. I see that now, and I hope that these arrests will protect our community and children in it." The attorney also says one of the teachers had been written up for inappropriate conduct with the student, and there could be more victims in this case. She also says there's information that more teachers could be involved. Now, this quote from the attorney also stood out to us, saying, quote, "Students who are being groomed by teachers are in a very difficult situation. It's not until they're removed from the situation and have the opportunity to process what happened that they feel comfortable speaking out." Joining us now to talk more about this case, someone who has a lot of experience investigating these types of claims, Dan Shore, former sex crimes prosecutor, current sex crimes investigator. Thank you, sir, for taking the time to be with us here on Law and Crime. To me, and I know you've investigated a lot of these, it was surprising to see two teachers arrested in this case. There's still a lot that we don't know, but to have a teacher who's 25, and then you have this other teacher who is 60 years old. What do you make of what we're learning thus far about what allegedly happened at this school?
That is unusual. I see a lot of cases like this. I started my career as a sex crimes prosecutor 25 years ago, and I've seen a lot of cases with teachers, people in authority taking advantage of students who are underage. And people seem to me be more shocked when it's a female teacher and a male student, but I've seen those cases many times for years. It is unusual, though, to see two separate teachers who are both charged with the same student, and the age disparity is also more unusual than other cases I've seen. There's a lot of facts we don't know yet. We don't know all the specifics, but if it is true, and they're both innocent until proven guilty, that two separate teachers with this age difference were both having some type of sexual interaction with an underage student, that is not only shocking and disturbing, but also unusual in how these cases usually present.
Yeah, because not only are two teachers charged here, the charges they're facing are different. Where Bonnie Brown, who's the 25-year-old teacher, she is facing a charge of inappropriate touching along those lines. Then Sherri Malden, who's the 60-year-old teacher, is facing, it seems, more charges, including statutory rape. What do you make of that?
Right. Statutory rape implies some kind of sexual intercourse, usually with the student who's underage. So that is generally what's called a strict liability crime, which means that there is criminal liability, regardless of whether there was an agreement by the underage person to have sexual activity, because someone who's underage, someone who's a student, they're not legally under the law able to consent. So that's what the statutory part of that means. And usually you don't see someone who is that much older doing activities like this. With the cases that I've seen, generally involve teachers in their 20s, 30s, 40s. So that is unusual. I would also like to know more, and I'm sure more facts will come out, about how much were these teachers allegedly acting together in concert, either supporting each other in what they were doing or maybe help covering it up. Again, we don't know what all the allegations are yet, but it would be surprising and even more unusual if they were completely independently acting with the same student, but we don't know yet.
It's unclear what Sherri Malden was doing. Both are former teachers of the school. This investigation started back in 2024, but Bonnie Brown was still teaching. And she was where this case allegedly happened was a private Christian school in Greene County, Georgia. At the time of her arrest, she was teaching in a neighboring county's public school system. And the district releases this statement saying, we had no idea that this was going on. If someone's being investigated for these types of crimes as a teacher, is there a way for a school district to know that this is going on, at least an investigation? Because she hadn't been charged at the time, presumably she was hired.
Right. So it's tricky with law enforcement because on the one hand, you do want to notify a school so that they can hopefully protect people. But on the other hand, you don't want to tip off the person being investigated because maybe your investigation requires some kind of either surveillance or monitoring of electronic communication. So I think law enforcement, I used to be a sex crimes prosecutor, so I dealt with these situations. They're trying to balance that. Ultimately, the school is going to be informed. You want other people to be protected. And then also the school has to do their own investigation, and the school put out this in their statement that consistent with not interfering with law enforcement, they are going to look into this because they have their own obligations to figure out not only what happened, but if it did happen, why did it go on for so long? Did people know about this and not report it? Were their policies not enforced, or were there not good reporting policies for people who were aware? There's a lot of questions here that a school needs to find out separate from the law enforcement investigation.
This was an investigation for according to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, that began in the summer, June of 2024. Now you have these arrests here in March of 2025. What does the investigation look like over those months to get to this point?
They might have been subpoenaing electronic records. They might have been talking to other people, maybe the alleged victim here, maybe other people, to find out what they knew. Often law enforcement will try to get as strong a case as possible before then approaching the person who's the target of the investigation and then confronting them with witness statements, hypothetically text messages, other electronic communication. You really want to have all that done and as much as possible a full understanding of what allegedly happened before approaching the defendant, before making an arrest. So generally when I was in law enforcement, that's what we would do. You want your case as strong as possible and you want to understand all the facts. You don't want to make an arrest and then start scrambling to find out information that might support that arrest.
And I think about this teacher too, who left this school, then goes to this neighboring county and works in the public school system. How likely is it she knew she was being investigated for this when she presumably would have applied for this job at this other school?
I wouldn't assume that she knew she was being investigated. Law enforcement may reach out to someone and say they're investigating them, but a lot of times law enforcement is first, as I said before, talking with the person who brought the complaint or someone who brought it on their behalf, trying to find out other information. Sometimes, and we don't know what's happening in this case, but I know in other cases I've done, you allow sometimes additional communication to occur while law enforcement's monitoring it to then see if there's some kind of admission of responsibility for what's being alleged or the attempt to engage in more illegal conduct. So a lot of times you don't want the target of the investigation to know they're being investigated. And as this case progresses in court, we'll find out a lot more, especially if it goes to trial. We'll learn more about how law enforcement approached this and what steps they took and when.
And now that you have both schools, you have this private school, which is run by an administration and a board of trustees, and then, of course, a public school that would have more of a public school board oversight. Both have said they cooperated, doing their own investigations. What type of accountability is there? I mean, how active is law enforcement in the after-the-fact investigation, making sure that, in the case of this public school, that nothing happened there and that the proper steps were taken when it comes to hiring someone who eventually was arrested for charges like this?
There's a lot of oversight for these types of issues. So you have local law enforcement. You also have from the federal government, the Department of Education, Office of Civil Rights, enforcing Title IX and rules about sexual misconduct. You might have a state Department of Education that looks into this. So I think there's going to be a lot of oversight and investigation from government authorities. The school has their own responsibility to investigate. And a big question in these cases is, what did the school know or what should they have known? So a lot of times in other cases, I've seen people reported suspicious behavior, inappropriate behavior, and nothing was done about it. Or sometimes people actually report really egregious conduct and a school does not act. Sometimes the school officials might not be aware of something, but other people knew about it, but they didn't know who to report to. So those are a lot of questions. Why was this allowed? If it occurred, why was it allowed to occur for so long? How did the administration respond? Hopefully, they will do an investigation that looks into and finds some of those answers.
And for this suspect who was, again, in two different schools, arrested at a public school, this allegedly happened at a private school, I think it creates an opportunity to talk about the environment at which these cases that I know you've investigated a lot of happen, where This allegedly happened, the case in Greene County at a private school, about 85 kids for K through 12, so a very small private Christian
Mhm.
school. And then she's arrested having worked at a public school. In your experience, what environments do you typically see these cases happen?
Do you mean private versus public
Yeah,
institutions?
private versus public, larger school compared to smaller school, rural versus
It
urban. Urban.
really
Is there
runs the
ever?
gamut.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really runs the gamut. I've seen it everywhere. Unfortunately, I think one thing as parents, we try to find a safe environment for our children and a place that we can trust people with our children. And unfortunately, a lot of the times when there's some kind of conduct like this, it's the people that you trust who are doing these types of violations, and that could be at a small school, that could be at a large school. I think it's really about the type of vetting that a school has when they're hiring people. That's a big factor. The type of oversight that they have over the conduct of the teachers, the culture of the school, where people, if they see inappropriate behavior, they report it. So hopefully, if there's inappropriate conduct, social media contact between teachers and students, we've seen that are inappropriate. Before it gets to actual physical sexual interactions, hopefully someone's flagging that and saying something. So those are the types of things we look for at schools, for an environment for to prevent this type of conduct. But you can't say that a certain type of school is more prone to it, because I really see it everywhere over the course of my career.
How does the law and typically the legal system view a case where, as you compare these two allegations, one suspect's 25 is going to be, and we don't know officially the age of the student who's the victim in this case, but let's just say they were a high school student, so they're closer in age, 25 to say 16, 17 years old. Does the legal system see any difference in what that relationship may have been like compared to the relationship between a student that young and then someone who's so old in her 60s who's accused of this crime?
I don't think the age of the defendants will be as much of a factor as their prior history. So, did they have prior referrals or discipline for doing similar behavior or other inappropriate behavior? Or was this a one-time thing? Was this an ongoing relationship, or was it a one-time incident? No matter what, whether it was once or many times, it's still going to be a serious criminal violation. But I think those are the type of factors you're looking for. It is surprising and unusual to have someone who's 60 accused of something like this. Not that people who are that age can't commit sex offenses, but generally, in my experience, prosecuting these cases, investigating these cases, the people who are accused of this type of misconduct tend to be younger, but not always. And that's why it's important to have oversight over everybody and proper reporting procedures and things like that to protect the community, no matter what age people are.
And I know the last time that we spoke, I think we were talking about a case in Ohio. It was a high school teacher
Mhm.
accused of having an inappropriate relationship with a student. Here we are talking about this situation again, and unfortunately, it probably won't be the last time that we talk about stories like this. And I remember last time asking you just kind of bluntly, like, how does this happen? And it's just, I think every time these stories come up, it is just so shocking that a teacher would cross the line like this, knowing the trouble they could get into and knowing the damage they could do to a young person. In your experience, what often is the reason that these cases seem to happen?
I think one is power and control. I think people focus, understandably so, on the sexual aspects of it, but a lot of it is power and control. Someone who's older, maybe they have issues in their own life, and here they have someone who's younger who they have some kind of influence over, and they can use that position of authority to have kind of an influence on that person in a way that maybe they can't have on other people in their lives. And we see that in a lot of these problematic relationships where there's a power imbalance and someone takes advantage of that power imbalance, and that could really be devastating to the younger person.
How common is it that the teacher is unaware that what they're doing is actually as bad as it really is?
Well, every teacher should know that having sexual interactions with
For
an
sure.
underage student is illegal and against school policy. So maybe on a moral level, they're justifying it to themselves. Maybe they are, I've seen statements of confessions from people where people felt that even though the person was underage, it was a mutual understanding that it was okay, which of course as a society we reject that kind of thinking when someone's underage, but someone may convince themselves that it's acceptable. And then we have other people who I've seen make statements of real remorse and saying, I knew it was wrong, but I kept doing this for whatever reason. I would say that most people who have a sexual relationship with a student when they are a teacher have other issues in their lives that have led them to commit this kind of act. That's not to excuse what they're doing, but I do think that it's either unhealthy relationships in other parts of their lives. Maybe they experience some kind of abuse in their lives, or maybe again there's some insecurity and they want to take advantage of this power dynamic that now they are on the powerful side of. So there's a lot of different motivating factors that don't excuse it, but certainly they can help us inform us as a society as we're trying to make policies and enforce them, so that way we could hopefully minimize this type of conduct. Sadly, it's never going to go away because this has been happening for a long, long time. It's just now it's getting more publicity than it used to.
Yeah, and do you feel that it's happening more, that these cases are happening more, or is it that, certainly we're talking about it, there's more media outlets that cover these types of stories, there's more awareness
Mhm.
that these types of cases are happening?
I don't think it's happening more. I've been prosecuting these types of cases for 25 years. I think it gets more media attention now, and it's easier to spread information. So a case like this, it could be on social media, and everyone in the country, everyone in the world has access to learning about it. When 20 years ago, 15 years ago, it might be a local news story that's shocking. Maybe it makes the national news, but then there's other news. Now it's a lot easier for people to focus on it, know about it, talk about it. And there's a good side to that and a bad side to that. The good side is we want people to be informed about this so they could be careful about it. They could be aware that this happens, and parents can help teach their children what to be worried about, not in an unhealthy way, but in a logical way, what you should be concerned about going to school with inappropriate relations. And so that's a positive part of it. The negative part of it is that sometimes it can make people think that this is happening even more than it is. And also some people who are accused are not guilty. People are innocent until proven guilty, and often it's hard to get your reputation back once your name is on social media, in the media, as having done something like this because of an arrest, even if you're not guilty in the end.
And one question I thought of related to the public versus private school aspect of it, and I know every state is different. When it comes to oversight and access from a state level or even a federal level at these schools, how does it compare when you think of a public school district versus something like this, a very small private Christian school in a rural county in Georgia?
A lot of it depends on the funding that they get from the government. So a lot of the oversight of for example, Title IX laws from the federal government, it's going to be about, is the school getting federal funding? Does the Office of Civil Rights from the Education Department then have jurisdiction to investigate the response to sexual misconduct? If a school gets no government funding, they're usually not scrutinized as much. Now, every school, whether they get funding or not, is subject to sexual assault laws such as statutory rape. So those are going to be enforced. But I think from a regulatory enforcement perspective of making sure that the policies are correct, that enforcement is happening, a lot of it depends on what kind of funding strings there are for the government to then do investigations. And also a lot of it's about the community. Is the community a community that is creating an environment where this is understood to be unacceptable and people feel comfortable stepping up and reporting? It's very rare that something like this is happening for a long period of time without someone, another student, another teacher, knowing that some type of suspicious activity was happening. And whether that person feels comfortable to step up and report it really depends on the culture of that school and that community. And that's a huge factor in stopping these early on.
And based on these charges, if convicted, how likely is it that both of these teachers would end up on the sex offender registry or spend time behind bars?
It depends on what specific sex acts they were convicted of and how many times it happened. But if there was sexual activity, especially actual sexual intercourse with a student who's underage by a teacher, I would expect that person, if they're convicted, to face some kind of prison time and also be on a sex offender registry list. I don't see any way to escape that. Sometimes with a plea bargain, someone can get a reduced sentence. Also, when you have two defendants, sometimes one person may make a better plea bargain for themselves in return for cooperating with the government to the prosecution of the other. We see that in many cases where there are two people arrested, and that often creates an incentive for both to try to get that beneficial plea bargain first before the other does. And that's some of the behind the scenes things that happen in these cases and other cases where there's multiple defendants.
And Dan, I know you've written about this topic a lot. Not only have you worked many of these cases, you do have a new book coming out. What can people know about that?
Sure. It's a novel called Open Bar. It's coming out in August, and it's about sexual misconduct in an educational environment. People can find more information about that and my other writings on Substack. If they search for Dan Shore on Substack, you'll see that and subscribe. And it's a constant issue, and I write in my fiction based on the real world investigations that I conduct.
Yeah, and it's so important that we continue to follow these stories because Unfortunately, this isn't going to be the last time that we have to talk about cases like this. Dan Shore, former sex crimes prosecutor, always great to have you on Law and Crime. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for covering this, and it's great to talk with you.
Georgia Bureau of Investigation says that this investigation is ongoing and anyone with information is encouraged to come forward. For On the Case presented by Law and Crime, I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.